Hi, my name is Rachel Moore, and I am pleased to be representing the Develop Climate Adaptation Science Investigator team from Goddard Space Flight Center. I am speaking with you today on behalf of my team members, Christine Suss and Amar Zaidi. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the NASA science advisors who assisted us throughout this research process: Dr. Molly Brown, Dr. Lahari Bonoa, and Dr. John Shinesi. I would also like to thank the NASA Center for Climate Simulation, which provided the team with valuable resources used throughout the completion of this project. On October 5, 2009, the President issued an executive order titled Federal Leadership in Environmental, Energy, and Economic Performance. This order mandates that all agencies evaluate agency climate change risks and vulnerabilities to manage the effects of climate change on the agency's operations and mission in both the short and long term. In response to this order, NASA has formed the Climate Adaptation Science Investigators Working Group, led by Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. The goal of this group is to increase the collaboration of NASA Earth science researchers, to investigate the risks that climate change may pose for each NASA center, and to develop center-specific adaptation strategies to prepare for these risks. The Develop team was invited by the Goddard Cassie principal investigator, Dr. Molly Brown, to assist in her research. As you can see from this image, a large portion of Goddard Space Flight Center is forested. These forests provide critical ecosystem services to the center as well as to the surrounding community. Global and regional climate variability and change may threaten the long-term sustainability of these valuable forest resources. In response to climate change, Goddard forests will likely experience a shift in species distribution, with increases in invasive plants, animals, insects, and diseases. Invasive species are non-native to the ecosystems under consideration, and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm. Invasive species outcompete native vegetation, lowering the biodiversity throughout an ecosystem. They are estimated to have an economic impact of $100 to $200 billion per year in the U.S. Early detection and eradication of these species by environmental managers is necessary to mitigate their detrimental effects. Invasive species habitat suitability is largely influenced by the climate of a given region. It is therefore important that environmental managers have an understanding of predicted climate change and the effects that these changes could have on the distribution of invasive species across their lands. The ability to anticipate the invasion of detrimental species would allow for effective monitoring, early detection, and eradication of these invasive species. The objective of this project was to use the maximum entropy habitat suitability model to map the potential shift in invasive species ranges in response to climate change. To complete this objective, the team set 4 goals. Identify an invasive species of concern in the state of Maryland and acquire in situ presence data. Identify remote sensing data layers that can provide environmental information to the model. Identify temperature and precipitation data that can be used to create a map time series of climate change predictions for 2010 to 2100, and to determine the response of the maximum entropy model to the inclusion of time-dependent climate data. The study area for this project was the state of Maryland. The species of interest analyzed was the wavy leaf basket grass. This species was first detected in Maryland in 1996. The image on this page shows the aggressive spread of the species at the initial site of detection between 1996 and 2007. If steps are not taken to eradicate the species, it could destroy up to 10% of the forests along the Atlantic coast in the next 100 years. The effect of climate change on the habitat suitability of wavy leaf basket grass in Maryland was modeled for the time period between 2010 and 2100. In situ species presence data was provided by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. North American Regional Reanalysis climate data was provided by the University of Maryland Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center. Environmental data layers were acquired from several NASA sensors, including MODIS, Terra, and Aqua, Landsat, and SRTM. Temperature and precipitation data for 2009 were gathered from the North American Regional Reanalysis Dataset, or NAR. This point data was imported into Esri's ArcMap GIS software. Temperature and precipitation data points were plotted based on their latitude and longitude. The resulting map can be seen on the left side of this slide. The point layers were then interpolated using the Cridge Spatial Analyst tool to create raster datasets for the study area. The resulting 2009 temperature and precipitation raster layers are shown on the right side of this slide. To determine the expected change in temperature and precipitation associated with climate variability and change, the team referred to the predictions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. The A1B scenario of the IPCC Fourth Assessment Report was analyzed. Predicted temperature and precipitation change curves were interpreted to estimate the linear change in temperature and precipitation per year from 2009 to 2100. The IPCC change curves used and the linear change curves derived by the team are shown on this slide. Temperature was predicted to change 0.027 degrees Celsius per year, resulting in a 2.4 degrees Celsius increase over the 90-year period. Precipitation was predicted to change 0.04% per year, resulting in a 3.6% change over the 90-year period. The calculated change for each climate variable was then applied to the corresponding raster dataset. This process resulted in temperature and precipitation map time series, providing predicted climate raster data for 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050, and 2100. The temperature time series produced is shown at the bottom of this slide. Once all of the environmental and climate data layers were prepared, they were processed using a Python command line procedure and loaded into the maximum entropy habitat suitability model. The team chose to test 3 different climate modeling scenarios. For each scenario, all environmental data layers were included, plus the climate variable of interest, temperature, precipitation, or temperature and precipitation, respectively. The images on this slide show the influence of temperature and precipitation variables on the predicted habitat suitability of the species during present conditions. The image in the upper left-hand corner of the slide is the control image, showing the predicted habitat suitability without the influence of temperature or precipitation. The other 3 images show the predicted habitat suitability with the indicated climate variable added to the modeling conditions. Predicted habitat suitability is classified using a continuous color gradient from blue to red. Blue indicates a low probability of habitat suitability, and red indicates a high probability. You can see that each combination of climate variables exhibit different influence on the predicted habitat suitability. For each of the 3 climate scenarios, 6 model runs were completed. In each successive run, the climate layer for the next decade was used in the modeling conditions. Through this process, 3 map time series were produced, showing the predicted habitat suitability under the influence of temperature, precipitation, or temperature and precipitation, respectively. Predicted habitat suitability, again, was classified using a continuous color gradient from blue to red. Blue indicates a low probability of habitat suitability, and red indicates a high probability. Also shown on this page is a table indicating the top contributing predictor layers for each scenario. Looking at the results, it is clear that the climate scenario used has a strong impact on the model predictions. For the temperature scenario, as well as the temperature and precipitation scenario, it appears that the study area becomes unsuitable for the growth of wavy leaf basket grass by the year 2100. Conversely, it appears that under the precipitation scenario, the percentage of the study area suitable for wavy leaf basket grass increases, but only in a tight band across the study area. There are several statements that can be made regarding the maximum entropy model results. First, the model did respond to the time-dependent climate data. Second, these map time series seem to suggest that climate variability and change will not result in widespread wavy leaf invasion. In fact, they suggest that the wavy leaf basket grass presence may decrease by the year 2100. These results should be interpreted carefully, though. On the bottom left side of the slide, there is a map showing the in situ presence points used to train the model. These points are clustered in one section of the study area. This may skew the model results. It is suggested that additional ground surveys be performed to provide a more even distribution of samples across the study area. Also, while it appears that habitat suitability in Maryland is not conducive for wavy leaf basket grass by the year 2100, this does not mean that the species will cease to exist. It is suggested that the study area be broadened in future research so that possible shifts of the species into other states may be analyzed. Several conclusions can be drawn from this study. First, the application of the IPCC change curves to the NAR climate raster data successfully produced climate map time series of temperature and precipitation representing the years 2010 to 2100. Second, the maximum entropy model responded to the influence of the climate raster datasets and has a potential for use in the mapping of invasive species range shifts in response to future climate change predictions. Third, the relationship between temperature, precipitation, and species range shifts will be dependent on the species of interest. These ecological relationships must be understood prior to any habitat suitability modeling effort. Last, higher resolution data is necessary to model the habitat suitability of invasive species on Goddard Space Flight Center. However, coarser resolution data can be used to determine the threat of invasive species to the areas surrounding the center. This information alone can help environmental managers anticipate and mitigate possible future invasions. On behalf of my entire team here at Develop, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to learn how NASA is using its data and technologies to study the spread of invasive species. Have a great day.